jump into chapter 7. So we're going to talk about outpatient care, and I have this little image from The Hobbit. So The Hobbit is the subtitle of The Hobbit is There and Back Again. I don't know if you do that, and outpatient care is a bit like that. So we've talked about the history of outpatient care. Or of healthcare, right? So going back to our discussion about pre-industrial and then during the industrial and how all these things have changed, right? Healthcare, was low tech and low value for most of human history. Right? It didn't have a lot of technology, and it didn't deliver a lot of goods for most of human history. It was only, in my grandparents' lifetimes, probably your great grandparents or maybe great grandparents' lifetime. So only in the 20th century, really, did healthcare delivery really start to actually be able to make people better. And that was the application of the scientific revolution and a lot of other things we've talked about. So really kind of pre-industrial, all medicine was basically primary care with a little bit of surgery mixed in, right? And that surgery was only the crudest, pre-anesthesia, it was only the crudest kind of surgery. So most medicine was pretty limited in what it could deliver. And so you see on the left, I took the picture I gave you a Time Life photo essay to look at a couple of classes back about a physician out in Colorado in the 30s, and he did most of his work as house calls. So if you were wealthy, you would have gotten all your care in the home. Right? The doctor would have come to you, and you would have gotten your care in the home. If you were poor, you would have gone to a hospital where the nurses were relatively ill-trained, where to some degree, most likely you were getting charity care there. So pre-industrial and early industrial, we just didn't have a lot of effective treatments. Honestly, most medicine was palliative, which means trying to control pain and prevent symptoms. And hospitals, like I said, were basically dumping grounds for the poor. So again, most medical care was delivered in the home, as you can, as you see on the left. Today, I keep using this idea because for me, it explains the most about behavior, right? So in the, through the 1940s and onward, technology began to really dominate healthcare delivery. And more of that technology was very expensive. And so individual doctors couldn't justify owning the technology. And then on top of that, a lot of healthcare became more team oriented. So if you talk to a surgeon, one who doesn't have an enormous ego, there's a few of them out there, he or she will tell you that they are really kind of like the captain of a team. It's not them doing the surgery, on their own. It's them doing the surgery with a whole lot of technical support from anesthesiologists, from laboratory, from imaging, from trained nursing staff, right? All of that. And all of that was concentrated through the middle of the 20th century into the hospital. And so what we saw was the rise of inpatient care. Along with that, kind of simultaneously, or one of the things that enabled that was hospital insurance that we talked about, the Baylor program, Baylor system that evolved into Blue Cross, right? And became hospital insurance. And then that evolved into paying for the professional services of physicians or extended, not evolved into, but extended to covering the professional services of physicians in the form of Blue Shield, right? And then we had all kind of this explosion of care, of insurance, private insurance. And then in the 1960s, we had Medicare and Medicaid arrive on the scene. And suddenly, there was financing for hospitals to be able to become medical hubs, right? So pre-insurance, there wasn't enough money to fund the investments that hospitals wanted to make, or that the medical community wanted to make. As they were better reimbursed, the natural evolution was, because this equipment is super expensive, is to focus it in one place, and that became the hospital, right? So we made these large, what we call in finance, capital investments, which means big pieces of equipment, right? Too expensive for any one doctor to own, but if we could put it in one place, the hospital becomes the doctor's workshop. So that's why I keep referring back to that. Not everybody agrees with me, but for me and my, going on 30 years in healthcare, the best way for me to understand why is a hospital the way it is to think about it as a shared resource for physicians to provide care. So through the 50s, we saw this convergence of practice, right? An emergence of, and prior to the 50s and the 60s and even into the 70s, most physicians were primary care providers. But your family medicine doctor back then used to also do basic surgery, deliver babies, right? The family medicine doctor did everything. And then they would also take care of you in the hospital. The hospital in my lifetime and a little bit before. So I was born in 1970. So in, prior, not long prior to my lifetime, this convergence of financing and health insurance that compensated physicians better for care, compensated hospitals more consistently and better, along with the arrival of technology that we could now afford because of the financing, encouraged the evolution of specialists. And so we started to see physicians shift away from being generalists, family medicine doctors, right? Your tradition, general practitioners is another, or GPs, you may hear that phrasing. So family medicine physicians gradually started to give way to more and more specialized physicians. So then we went through, in prior chapter, we talked about all of a sudden we had cardiologists and ophthalmologists and, and so on, right? All this specialties and subspecialties. Well, those specialties and subspecialties were not possible without the financing and the concentration of technology in the hospital. So all these things co-evolve together, if you think about it. It's a very organic process, right? Like if you think about why does a giraffe have a long neck? To reach the leaves that are up high, right? Well, why does it need to reach the leaves that are up high? Well, the trees that are where it's at, right, have grown such that most of their leaves are up high. And so the giraffe has evolved to have a long neck to reach the leaves. So which came first, the long necks or the tall trees, right? And the answer is yes, right? So, it's you can't sort that out. It's a chicken, literally it's a chicken and egg kind of question. And I would say that's the same with why have we seen specialists evolve in, why do we see so many specialists in the United States? Well, the answer is that's where the money is. Well, why is the money there? Well, because we have wanted specialists, it's kind of one of these things, but they all co-evolve together. As the opportunity presented itself, we saw more people pursuing that. So, thinking about this, so this is kind of the idea I'm trying to present here is kind of what it looked like from the 50s, the 40s and 50s through to relatively recently, the 90s, right? With the hospital as the center of gravity, if you will, the 800-pound gorilla, right? Where all the technology is there. The specialists all use the technology at the hospital. The specialists are basically are primarily anchored to the hospital because that's where the technology is. And so you have out on the sides of this web, you have the primary care doctors who are seeing us as individuals and then are directing us to specialists who then funnel us into the hospital at the center of in the center, the circle in the center, where the specialist can actually do her work or his work. Why? Because they have this shared technology. They have nursing support. That's the center of gravity for the system. Well, that's how it was for a long time. And so we saw more care delivered in the hospital, right? So care moved from being in the home to being in the hospital. The hospital moved from being a charity, a dumping ground for poor people that couldn't afford care to where the most sophisticated care was delivered. And so a lot of this is enabled and created by insurance because technology is so expensive and individual providers couldn't afford it. But also, this is where we could optimize in terms of training our support staff. And again, the whole thing co-evolved. So I realized that I was reviewing this slide I had made last summer. A hospital is like an album. And then it occurred to me that you all may have never owned an album. You've probably seen pictures of them. This is the thing is like this big, round. You put it on a thing called a record player. I know you all know that. I'm teasing a little bit. But when I was a kid, that was what we had, was records. Super excited when CDs came out because the sound quality was so much better. Right. And today, of course, I have maybe like your parents, I suspect maybe you don't, but I have about, I don't know, 400 or 500 CDs collecting dust in my basement because I listen to all my music on, Spotify, like you probably do, right? But anyway, going back to our metaphor, a hospital is like an album, right? Or a CD, or maybe a playlist, so it used to be, it really actually works better if you think of it as a CD or an album, because you had to buy all of the songs, right? If you had your latest CD by, I want to try to sound relevant, not like I only listen to music out of the 80s, Taylor Swift, right? So I'm trying. So you have your latest, latest CD from Taylor Swift, and you really like 2 of the songs, right? And back in the day, you didn't have Spotify, and so you had to buy the whole album, right? And actually, really, this all changed with the MP3 because then you could buy individual songs. But when I was growing up, until I don't know, when did MP3s come out? 2000-ish, right? So if you wanted to get your favorite song, you had to buy the whole album. So you had to buy 15 songs, pay for 15 songs or whatever it is they stick on them, so that you could get the 1 or 2 songs that you really, really were excited about. So a hospital is a lot like that, right? So a hospital is a package or a bundle of services, and they're put together. And so you as a physician, let's say you are an ENT doc. Well, you might want to use, so an ENT, eyes, nose, throat, otherwise known as an otolaryngologist. It's so much easier to say ENT. But an ENT doc, you might use the hospital for some of your more serious surgeries. So ENT docs will do everything from, some of you probably got tubes in your ears when you were little because you were getting a lot of earaches. So that an ENT would do that. But that's a pretty simple procedure. but it does require anesthesia because little kids don't like you stuffing stuff in their ears. So they'll put you under while they do the procedure so you don't move around and get hurt. So an ENT might use operating rooms at a hospital. They're going to need, if you're going to get anesthesia, there's got to be a nurse. There's got to be a nursing team to do your post-operative recovery, right? There's got to be, if you're doing something more complex with inpatient, right? So remember, up through the 80s with cost plus reimbursement, we admitted patients for long periods of time. And so the hospital was very robust because people were being admitted for long periods of time. We had a lot of beds because people stayed in the hospital for a long time. And so you need nursing care for those medical admissions. You need imaging technology if you're an ENT and you want to get, a picture of somebody's ear. So, ENTs, oh, by the way, also do a lot of cancer care. So, cancer of the throat, cancer of the mouth, cancer of the tongue, a lot of that kind of work. That requires more complex care. You might then need chemotherapy, wasn't coming up, chemotherapy, other things, right? So there's all this technology that you're taking advantage of, and it's all kind of bundled together. Now, if you're an ENT doc, you may not need all of it all the time, but it was too expensive for you and you didn't get reimbursed enough for you to build your own facility. So you just used the hospital. And that was the same for ophthalmologists, for example, people that do eyes. So my dad, he's 73, just got cataracts done. So he got like new lenses put in, and he's basically got 20/20 vision at 74 years old. It's kind of cool to see. He's still recovering, but it's kind of amazing. My father-in-law, who's 84, had it done a couple of years ago, and he has worn glasses since he was like 6. So even though he had 20/20 vision, he asked to get like clear glass glasses because he just couldn't, wasn't at this point in time going to get used to not wearing glasses. So it's kind of cute, but that's amazing. Like that, just that idea that an 84-year-old person can now have 20/20 vision in, and this was an outpatient surgery, right? And it was done in what we call an ambulatory surgery center. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So what did we talk about going way back, right? In 1965, when we came up with the idea of Medicare, we're like, hey, Medicare, it'd be a great idea. Let's give all the old folks free healthcare. We're a rich nation, we can afford it. Well, back in 1965, first year after implementation, Medicare cost us $3.6 billion, which is a lot of money back in 1965. But even if you brought that up to today's dollars, that would be a fraction of what it actually is today. And so by 1982, that amount had ballooned to 84 million. And remember, that's when we had the PPS, we shifted over to PPS, right? Prospective payment. So we went from cost plus reimbursement to our hospitals and traditional fee for service to our physicians, to a PPS for the hospitals. And then in the 90s, we shift over to PPS for physicians. Because by 1982, $84.2 billion. So that we went from 3.6 to 84 in 17 years. And then fast forward to last year, we spent $696 billion on Medicare alone. Never mind Medicaid, never mind Veterans Health Administration, the VHA, that takes care of all our veterans, never mind the military health system, never mind the Indian health system, which I realize is an outmoded name, but that's what it's called. Never mind the Bureau of Federal Prison Health System, right? So 696 is just kind of the beginning of the price tag for what we spent, what the federal government spent last year on healthcare. So we've seen prices continue to balloon rapidly. So we talked about prospective payment, right? We said, all right, through 65 to 82, hospitals were reimbursed on this cost plus. This is a little quick review, right? 83, we switched over to PPS, fixed price based on diagnostic related groups, DRGs, right? Under PPS, reimbursement was fixed, longer stays meant less profit. And so what did we see? A collapse in the number of days that patients were staying in the hospital. That resulted in, I forget if I said this, in the 80s, hospitals were disappearing, were going out of business in droves, right? Droves. Hundreds and hundreds of hospitals went out of business. And that continues to happen, but slightly different reasons, because it's not now the changeover from cost plus to PPS was an intense shock that most hospitals had been built around, because we talk about that coevolution, right? Hospitals had built themselves around a particular way of being reimbursed. So they had lots of nursing staff, lots of beds, because you had long stays. And then we said, no more paying based on how much it costs. We're going to give you a fixed reimbursement. And a lot of hospitals just couldn't figure out how to cut their costs, right? And shorten their stays fast enough such that they went bankrupt. So, like I said, we started to change. So what we saw was a rapid change, and I've kind of already touched on this, but this chapter is all about these ideas. And so hospitals started saying, well, how do we cut the amount of time that people have to stay in the hospital? And they started to shift towards ambulatory surgery, which means that you don't get admitted after the surgery. You don't get admitted for the surgery. So you don't spend a night in the hospital. You leave before midnight. And then they continued to develop techniques to shorten stays. So I've talked a little bit about some of these examples, but here's one. Laparoscopic surgery. So I think I don't know that I showed a picture of it. I showed you a picture of a Da Vinci robot, but this is laparoscopic surgery. So I've been talking about, right, the little grabby tools that, you might have played with something that looks like this. This is a little more sophisticated than your Fisher-Price version with the little claw on the end, right? But you can see here, somebody's getting, some sort of surgery, and they've just got, a bunch of these sticks, right? And so this becomes what we call minimally invasive surgery. So instead of, like I said, zipping you open, from groin to chest, to do, something basic like a hernia repair, you're now making these little cuts. You can see, just little cuts. What does this do? Well, it reduces the, amongst other things, when I zip you open and open you up, you open your gut up to the world, right? Even if I'm keeping that room as clean as I possibly can, something we've all learned in the last 2 years is, just how we can transmit all kinds of germs and disease. So even if we've got as clean as possible, we've got you opened up, and anything floating around can just land in you. So by keeping you as closed up as possible, we reduce the probability of complications from infection, which is a major risk, right? And so, and then it takes a lot less time to heal from 4 or 5 small, 1 centimeter cuts than it does from a 20 centimeter cut that opened you wide open. And so it can reduce the length of stay either to a very short inpatient stay or preferably to outpatient. Right. So to me, the outpatient revolution was like the MP3. So this was very exciting to me when, I could buy my individual songs from iTunes, and I could start like building my own CDs, and it was just wonderful. So now the latest Taylor Swift, well, not now, let's back up, 20 years to, to the MP3, because probably now you probably don't even have an MP3 player on your phone, or if you do, you probably don't use it because you're using Spotify all the time, right? But the MP3 revolution, much like PPS wreaked all kinds of havoc on the healthcare industry, the MP3 revolution, or MP3 evolution, I don't know what I say, revolution, all right, revolution, upended the recording industry, right? Because the recording industry had been built around sales of albums. Like, we're going to get a couple of, we know we're going to get a couple of hit songs from the latest pop artist. We'll put them on there, and then we'll just get them to write 10 more songs that nobody's really going to listen to, but we're going to sell it as if you really want all those other 10 songs too. I mean, I don't know how about you, but how many, I mean, to the degree that you even listen to whole albums or playlists that are based on an album. I mean, how many of you have albums where you're like, I like every song on this album? And probably there aren't that many. I mean, I can think of like 3 that and I've been listening to them for a long time. So the MP3 revolution upended the recording industry. I mean, first of all, it destroyed record shops. So there are some record shops. I realize there are still some record shops around, and some of you all who are like sophisticated audiophiles still listen to records, and you probably have $2,000, or maybe your parents have $2,000 record players, with a diamond needle and blah, 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 right? But there used to be, a dozen record shops. When I was a kid, there were a dozen record shops in town. Like there were also a whole bunch of these things called bookstores that used to be around as well, before Borders and what was the one that went out of business? Barnes and Noble. No, Barnes and Noble. Yeah, Borders went out of business, right? Barnes and Noble's still around. So Barnes and Noble and Borders ate all the small bookshops, and then Amazon ate Barnes and Noble's lunch, right? So Barnes and Noble is still hanging on. But when I was a kid, there'd be, in a town like Durham, there'd probably be 3 record shops, right? And you'd go kind of check them all out, and they'd have different, access to different records. And it was kind of exciting to browse. And then the MP3 came, and you're like, why do I need to go to a record store anymore? And why do I need to buy a whole record when I can buy the 2 songs that I want, download them from iTunes for 99 cents each? Why would I pay $15.99 for a CD, right? When I don't want 11 of the 13 songs or whatever it is anyway, right? So why am I talking about MP3s? Well, because what happened to the recording industry is very similar to what happened to hospitals. So hospitals were already on the ropes. For as a result of the shift from cost plus to PPS, and they really kind of, it was really, the first 10 years, many hospitals closed, then it kept going, and we're still seeing hospitals going out of business. They either go out of business or they get acquired by larger organizations and they become part of a system because they can't make enough money on their own. So like the MP3 revolution and how it changed the recording industry and honestly, how we listen to music, right? So we listen to music very differently than we once did. Hospitals, same thing. If you don't need inpatient services, do you really need a hospital? Well, one of the great things about free markets is the technology piece, while wicked expensive, right? That's a technical term, wicked expensive. While wicked expensive, tends to go down in price, right? Why? Because we talked about drugs and patents, right? And so if you have a drug and you have a patent for it, and it takes you get it patented when you have the initial chemical mix and you're like, all right, I think this is going to work. Send in the patent. Then it takes you, 5-6 more years of testing and working with the FDA to get it approved so you can start to market it. Well, the patent's only 20 years long. And so you've got 14 years to sell your drug while you have that patent protection. So while you have that patent protection, you can charge whatever you like. But the day it goes off patent, there are a whole bunch of generic pharmaceutical manufacturers who specialize in knocking off your formerly patented drug, right, by backwards engineering it. They hire a bunch of biomedical people to backwards engineer your drug. And the day you go off patent, they're circling like vultures, right? And they just swoop in, and the drug that you've been selling for, $100 a pill falls to 74 cents per pill, right? At which point, hopefully you've got something else in the pipeline that you're able to charge $100 per pill for. Well, hospitals face the same sort of thing. MRI machines, when they first came out, were incredibly expensive, and you could only get them, in New York. If you lived in New York City, you'd have access to one. You might have had a, months long wait. Most hospitals didn't have one. Well, now there's probably, I haven't actually counted, but I know Wentworth Douglas has got one, Exeter's got one, Portsmouth's got one, Frisbee's got one. There's at least and there's probably some standalone ones that I haven't paid attention to. There's probably, within a 20-minute drive of here, there's probably 10 of them, right? And that's in relatively rural New Hampshire. So the price of MRI machines, while they're still incredibly expensive, are just a fraction of what they once were, right? And because technology keeps marching along, the patents run out and the prices fall. So as the price of an MRI machine falls, radiologists who have been doing their work in hospitals, right, or relying on the hospital to provide them with scans to read, start to say, and they look and they say, well, the hospital is getting $1,400 for the scan, and then I'm getting like $300 to read it. What if I owned my own MRI machine, and then I could get the $1,400 for the scan and the $300 to read it? And all I need to do is buy a $2 million piece of equipment. But at $1,400 a whack, if I can keep that thing churning, if I can keep enough people going through it, then I can pay that I can pay that $2 million. And so that's the logic of standalone imaging centers. So radiologists are pretty smart guys, right? And gals, pretty smart guys and gals. And they look at the economics and they say, 90% of what the hospital is currently doing, I could do on an outpatient basis, right? I could do it at my little imaging center, and I'll leave the hospital with the most complex ones to do because they have the nursing staff, and maybe it's it's somebody coming out of the emergency department. So you're not going to, after a car crash, we're not going to put you in an ambulance to go out to an outpatient imaging center and then back to the hospital. So there's always going to be a need for imaging in the hospital. But the radiologist said, most of these things are somebody's got a hurt knee, somebody's got, headache or whatever. It's not an emergent situation. It doesn't need to be done in a hospital. I could do it in my privately owned imaging center 3 blocks from the hospital, right? And then I get to keep the whole enchilada, right? So the same goes for the ENT doc. So I have an acquaintance who's an ENT doc. I really like her. If you ever need an ENT doc, let me know. She's great. I refer you to her. But her office is on the backside of the ambulatory surgery center that she owns in conjunction with some partners. Right. So there's a group of doctors get together and they say, most of the surgery we're doing is outpatient surgery. The person is not going to spend the night in the hospital. Well, if this person's not going to spend the night in the hospital anyway, why do we need to have beds? We don't need to have beds. All we need to have is a bed for them to recover in after they come out of surgery, to kind of wake up from anesthesia, right? Make sure that whatever they're, some of the basic, they can get back their ADLs, they can go to the bathroom and they can swallow and all these things that we want to make sure, right? Before we send them home. Why do we need to do that in the hospital? Well, we could, the equipment now is cheap enough that I don't need to share it with the entire community of doctors. I can just build my own ambulatory surgery center with 4 ORs or 6 ORs or whatever, or 2 ORs, whatever I want, right? With the equipment, because the compensation now, the equipment has fallen in cost enough that I don't need to share it with as many people. So I can justify buying the equipment, buying the anesthesia equipment, buying the, all the equipping the operating room, the operating suite. I don't need to use the doctor's workshop anymore. And when I do that, when I own my own ambulatory surgery center, the patient isn't going to pay the hospital for the facility charge. They'll pay me. So I will get, so instead of the hospital collecting its facility charge, right? Because we've talked about that. When you get a procedure done in a hospital, you get a professional fee from the physician that's doing the surgery, right? Or doing the procedure, whatever that is. And then the hospital sends you a second bill for their facility fees, right? For, the time you spent in the bed, the time, the nurses who took care of you, the food you ate, all that stuff is built into the facility charge. So the surgeon looks at that and says, all I'm getting is the $5,000, whatever it was for the procedure. And the hospital's getting another $5,000 for providing the OR and on the recovery room and all that. I just build my own, right? And if I'm doing procedures that are simple enough, like tubes and ears, right? Super simple. I'm just going to do it in my own ambulatory surgery center, which my ENT friend, in fact, does. She said, I talked to her a year ago. Maybe it was a little long. No, it was during COVID. I went to see her. She was actually seeing me for something. And I was asking her about that. And I said, I met her through Exeter, through some work I was doing at Exeter Hospital. And I said, so are you still doing a lot of work at Exeter? She said, no, I'm mostly just, 90% of my surgeries are in my little ambulatory surgery center, behind my office. So it's bigger than that, but she's located, if you know where 108 is in Exeter, going down south on 108. So on the right side, there's a CVS right before you get to the 101 overpass. There's a CVS and there's a ambulatory surgery center. That's where it is. And so she uses the ambulatory surgery center. It's owned by a group of doctors. So there's a couple of different type of doctors that use it. They then get to capture all the facility charges that used to go to the hospital. So they take all of what, this is not a technical term, but what I like to think of as the bread and butter kind of procedures, right? The simple stuff that doesn't require high levels of support, and they do it in an outpatient setting. And that strips away from the hospital a lot of kind of the easy work and leaves behind in the hospital only the most complicated cases. So my friend, the ENT surgeon, if she's going to do something that requires that you be admitted, to be observed because maybe she's cutting on your throat. So she's, maybe working on your airway. That's a very good reason to spend the night in the hospital. You want a nurse to be overseeing your recovery, because if you can't breathe, it's a long way to the hospital. So, you want to, if she's doing work on your airway, you're going to be in the hospital. So when she does that kind of work, she does it in the hospital. But every time she does tubes or does some, a nose job or, some other kind of outpatient surgery, most of the time now she just does it in her ambulatory surgery center, and she gets to keep the facility fee for herself. So that's the logic behind that, right? So we've seen that, and my sister's father-in-law is an ophthalmologist, right? Eye doctor, right? Eye physician, not an optometrist. So he does, like I said, cataract surgery, like my dad just had. He does those, he does 20 of them a day, right? boom, 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 boom. Used to do them in a hospital because it used to be an inpatient stay if you got a cataract surgery. Well, today it's like you're in at 9, you're out at 11, and and you've had your cataract done and you go home. It's not inpatient anymore. So this, my sister's father-in-law, does like 20 of these a day, and he's just churns them out, and he gets, $2,000 per eye, plus a facility charge of another $1,000, right? Had he done it in a hospital, he would have lost $1,000 in facility charges. So that $1,000 in facility charges, he uses to pay for the surgery center, the space, the equipment, the personnel, right? The anesthesia, well, the anesthesia is a separate bill, that are happening, and it's cheap enough now that he doesn't need to share that. So all these things are progressing, right? And what's happening is the bread and butter stuff is getting pulled out of the hospital. So the lower level intensity, right? So I say bread and butter, but the low level intensity stuff, right? The easy things to do get pulled out of the hospital, and the doctors are doing them in outpatient settings, sometimes in their offices, sometimes in surgery centers or standalone imaging centers. My father was a pathologist, so he ran the laboratory at Cheshire Medical Center in Keene for almost 30 years. What he saw in his career, I think I mentioned this, like he was choosing between radiology and pathology, and he chose pathology because he was a biomed guy and he really liked that stuff. And he grew to regret it because pathology was one of the early businesses to face this, where the business got siphoned off to commercial laboratories. So people stopped going to the hospital for their lab tests, and started going to commercial laboratories because they could do it faster and cheaper. And that cuts into the pathologist. It cuts into the need for the hospital to have a pathologist, and then it cuts into the pathologist's own fees. And so you saw a reduced demand for pathologists overall, fewer pathologists were needed, and then their compensation also fell. So that's a part of this whole deconstructing the hospital, right? So it used to be you'd go to the hospital, get labs done. Now, most likely, if your insurance company is driving your care, you're going to go to an outpatient laboratory because it's cheaper. So what's left in the hospitals are the most complex, most intense, most intensive care, right? Now, what did this do? Well, this last line is the most important piece of this story, really. And that is that when the hospital was like an album, right? And you have like the two songs, equivalent here would be like the 2 songs on the album that you really want, right? Are like the most intense care, right? The people are most willing to pay for. And then all the other songs, they're like the bread and butter songs that, they're the songs that we don't really want. Well, we do want this bread and butter. If your kid is getting ear infections constantly, you really do want the tubes for them because it makes them better, makes them more comfortable. But what would happen is you'd have these super intensive, expensive procedures that required a lot of nursing support, a lot of resources from the hospital. You'd have those 2, and then you'd have 10 more procedures that were, tubes and other simple, things. And what the hospital would do is it would kind of take some of the cost from providing the really expensive services and transfer it, or cost shift, that is the formal term, cost shift from the expensive surgeries to the less expensive surgeries. So it kind of evened out. So if you were coming in to get tubes in your kids' ears at the hospital, you were paying more than you could today if you went to an ambulatory surgery center. You pay more to have it done in the hospital. That extra that you pay goes to help offset the cost of providing the really complex care, right? The heart transplant or things like that. So when a hospital can do a bunch of simple stuff, it can charge a little more for all the simple stuff and reduce the cost that it has to, reduce the price it has to charge for the more intense stuff. It can cost shift. It shifts some cost from the really expensive stuff from the really expensive care to the patients who have the less expensive care. But when you take that really cheap, easy stuff out, the bread and butter, and you put it out and you take it out of the hospital, all that's left is the really expensive stuff, and there's no place to cost shift it. And so your heart transplant goes up by 20 or 30% in cost, not because it's more expensive to care for it anymore. It's because we used to be able to hide some of that cost by charging all the other patients a little bit more. And when we take all those other patients, we put them out into the outpatient setting in ambulatory surgery centers or imaging centers and so forth, the hospital loses the ability to cost shift. And so the stuff that remains becomes even more expensive. This logic is a lot like we talked about the death spiral for insurance companies before. It's this very similar thing. When you take the low intensity care out, all that's left is the high intensity care, and the high intensity care is very expensive. And so you can't shift some of the costs from the expensive stuff to the less expensive stuff. So that is a huge dynamic in hospitals today. So what does that look like? Well, the first version of this slide, I had the hospital in the circle in the middle was really big. Well, it's been shrinking, right? Why has it been shrinking? Well, a lot of what's being done had been done in the hospital is being shifted out to outpatient settings. You have the imaging centers, you have the standalone emergency departments even, you have urgent cares, you have ambulatory surgeon centers, you have dialysis being done in an outpatient setting. So all these orange circles are pulling something out of the center and putting it into an outpatient setting. So we still have the primary care docs feeding the specialist patients, right? Because most people don't go directly to a specialist. They go to their primary care doc and say, I've got this problem, and the primary care doc says, you need to see this particular specialist. And then used to be the specialist would then do all of their work they'd either do it in their office or they do it in the hospital. But now the specialist has a choice of referring out to ambulatory surgery centers. We call them ASCs. So they can refer them out to ASCs. They can send them to, their own imaging centers. They can send them, all over. They have choice now. And so the only things that, and the specialists tend to make more money if they can do it in an ambulatory setting, because they're usually partners. So I'm not sure I said this. My sister's father-in-law, the ophthalmologist, owns his own ASC. So he gets all of the facility charges come to him directly, right? So that's the major driver here, is the specialists now can capture more of the revenue by doing it in an outpatient setting where they control the whole system, right? And the whole stream of resources. So high value, profitable care is being pulled out of the hospital and done in an ambulatory setting. And again, the result is hospitals can't cost shift, and therefore the care that's actually done in the hospital becomes more expensive. All right. This is all, you can download this. I see a couple of you trying to scribble it down, but I'm gonna keep moving. So you should be able to download that chart. All right. So kind of shifting and thinking about care, where it's done, right? We start with primary care. It's always outpatient. It's your first line of defense. It's your family medicine doc. It's your pediatrician when you were younger. It is your nurse practitioner. If you're like me, you got a nurse practitioner as your primary care provider. It's your first line person you're going to go to when you've got a problem. You've tried to take care of it on your own. You've taken Motrin on your own, whatever. You've self-medicated, and you're like, yeah, this thing is just not going away. I need a professional to help me figure out what's going on. So you go to your primary care doctor, and ideally the primary care doctor is focused on wellness, right? Or your overall health. So going all the way back to what is health, right? Is it the absence of disease or is it overall state of wellness? Well, philosophically, we've shifted towards that idea of an overall state of wellness. So that's what they focus on now. Importantly, physicians who go into the primary care fields, so people who want to become pediatricians, who want to become family medicine docs, who want to become internists, non-specialized internists, their main motivation is they really want to develop a relationship with their patients. They want to get to know you. They want to know about your kids. They want to know about your parents. They want to know about your career. They want to know a little bit about you. They want to have a relationship with you and understand you so that they can take better care of you. So a good family medicine doc or primary care provider, whether it's a doctor or a nurse practitioner, actually knows something about you, right? Because if they understand something, so I think it was the first or second class, I told you my whole drama with my blood, right? And how I went from like the GI doc did like 8,000 tests on me. And then she reminds, she's like, I can't figure it out, and literally, I think we've spent, at that point, we'd spent somewhere between $7,000 and $10,000 in which I've paid a couple $100, but the health system has now spent $7,000 or $8,000 on me probably to try to figure out where's my missing blood, and go to the hematologist, and she runs, she's like, this is a mystery. Let's get you on some iron pills. And I, literally I'm standing in Rite Aid looking for the iron pills, and I'm thinking to myself, based on what she said, I'm like, I give blood like every quarter, I was giving blood almost every 8 weeks at that point. And I said, my next appointment, like, she's like, well, she did the iron. I took the iron for, I don't know, 2 months or something, and went back and saw her. And she's like, wow, everything looks normal now. This is really weird. And I said, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I give blood like all the time, like, safely, because it's like you shouldn't give blood more than every eight weeks. But I had an app on my phone, Red Cross app on my phone. Every 8 weeks, bing, time to give blood. And I'm like, okay, I'm like a little dog, go down to the place and give blood. And I said to the hematologist, I'm like, I gave blood like 4 times last year, 5 times last year. And she's like, it was one of these moments. She's like, you're kidding, right? It's like, she's like, I don't think I knew that. He's like, that explains it, by the way. So I'm like, had the GI doc just said, by the way, do you give blood very often? We would have saved like $8,000 and, 4 visits to, different specialists. And just insane. There's nothing wrong with me except that I give blood more than, and I said to the hematologist, and she's like, why do you give so often? I said, well, I just feel like it's just, it's kind of a civil duty. Like, former military guy, I give blood. It's what we do. And she's like, well, most people don't do that, which you all should. You're young. And if you are young and healthy, you should be giving blood. Maybe not, as often as I was doing, but you should give blood. It's good. It's good for society. People need it. So the story there is, had my primary care, had this GI doc been my primary care provider, hopefully we would have had a relationship where she would have been like, oh yeah, I know you give blood all the time. I know this, right? But a GI doc's a specialist. She just focuses on, her own little problem set. So the benefit of good primary care is it coordinates with your primary care doctor. Should be reviewing the notes that come from the specialist. So when the specialist sees you, if you get referred to a specialist, the specialist should be sending notes back to the primary care doctor saying, I saw Bonica and, noted this thing about his blood, and I'm going to send him on for other stuff. And for whatever reason, well, I don't go to I'm kind of an odd animal. I don't go to my primary care provider all that often. So she doesn't know me all that well. Perfectly nice young lady, but doesn't know me that well. But had she seen all these notes coming in, and had she known me better than she does, she would have looked at it and said, he gives blood. That's why this is wrong. That's why this is all messed up. So So ideally, in an ideal situation, the primary care provider is overseeing all this care and kind of acting as your advocate, which is where it failed in my case. The primary care provider did not kind of figure out, did not review the tests and figure out that, oh, simple answer here, we don't need to keep buying more tests because Bonica gives a lot of blood and maybe he should slow down a little bit. So ideally, your primary care provider is the person who provides you kind of that first line of defense, that first line of care. They are a mile wide and an inch deep, that saying. So they know a little bit about a whole lot of stuff. And most primary care providers get to be really good at something, like they kind of get to be really good at dermatology, or they get really good at, reflux or something. But their primary purpose is to be able to diagnose over a wide range of systems and problems. And then their second goal or purpose is to coordinate the care of specialists who are interacting with you. Because if you have so just in my simple example where I am actually perfectly healthy, just gave too much blood. I had a GI doc looking at me. I had a radiologist looking at my stuff. I had and ultimately had a hematologist, a blood doctor, looking at, doing tests on me. If the system had been working as it's designed, my primary care doctor, whatever, primary care provider should have been reviewing all of those tests as they were coming in and kind of trying to piece together a story of what's going on. And the benefit of the primary care doctor is she, in my case, she has all of the information, whereas the individual specialists only have their own kind of narrow window. So in an ideal world, that silly situation would have been solved, and they would just, she would have said, you know what, instead of giving blood 6 times a year, why don't you just give blood twice a year or 3 times a year and take some iron pills? And we wouldn't have wasted so much money. So ideally, a primary care doctor is comprehensive, longitudinal. They're getting to know you. They understand what they don't just understand your clinical conditions, but they know something about you and your behavior so that they can manage your care better. And that's where the failure was in my story. Was she didn't know. She probably saw the test and she was like, I'm just as baffled as everybody else is, right? But nobody bothered to ask this super simple question of, hey, by the way, do you give blood? And how often? So primary care, first line, comprehensive and longitudinal, right? I'm going to see that GI doc and I'm going to go back and see her in like 3 years for my next, I have my next colonoscopy will be in 3 years. So she's not my continuity of care, right? It's my primary care provider that I'm going to go to, I'll probably go again sometime to get an annual physical, and I'll tell her the story of the blood thing. So then we had secondary care. So primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. So secondary care is where your specialists are at. So now you're getting specialized care of some sort. And the difference here is it is not frequent, and it is, unless you're really ill, it's not frequent, and it's not comprehensive, and it is narrowly specialized. So whereas a primary care doctor is a mile wide and an inch deep, a specialist is an inch wide and a mile deep, right? So cardiologists think about hearts. They think about them when they're having breakfast. They think about them, on the drive to work. They think about them while they're taking care of their patients. They talk about them while they're at lunch. They work on some more. They dream about hearts, right? That's all they do, right? They heart all the time. Likewise, oncologists, so those are your cancer doctors, right? Orthopedic surgeons, so on. They're highly specialized into a particular area. And it's not that they're ignorant, but that they know that's where they focus. And if there's something outside that system, they're going to say, hey, it's not my thing. You go see the dermatologist for that, that rash that you have in that special place. So included in here, OB is an important one, right? So that's an example of specialty secondary care, right? We all come into this world with some sort of OB care, joint repair, things like that. That's secondary. So hospital like Exeter Hospital is a secondary care facility primarily. So your community hospitals, your smaller community hospitals are primarily secondary care. They may get into a little bit of tertiary care, but primarily they are secondary care facilities, right? So they're going to have an OB ward where they're going to deliver in some babies. They're going to do general surgery. They're going to get, if you've got, you'll get your oncology care there. If you develop a cancer, you'll get joint repair there, basic stuff. Tertiary care used to be, this was the highest level that we talked about. And I think your book only talks about up to tertiary care. And they say that tertiary care is the highest level of care. If you talk to the people at Dartmouth Hitchcock, if you talk to the people at MGH, they refer to themselves as quaternary care or fourth level care. So this is a relatively new idea, I think, and it's starting to kind of parse out a little more tertiary care. Just the difference between tertiary, I'm not going to ask you a question like that, would expect you to be able to parse between what's tertiary and quaternary, because I'm not sure that I can always tell you either, because it's kind of a new idea. And I think to be just between you and me, I think they like this, they're just trying to make themselves sound fancier by establishing yet another level of, and pretty soon we'll have whatever 5 would be probably, just because they want to make themselves feel really complicated and special. You'd imagine quaternary care would be organ transplants, anything that's super experimental, super expensive, face transplant or something like that. Trauma care, definitely tertiary. Trauma care is definitely tertiary. If you have a baby who's born very early, you may have to go to the NICU, to the neonatal intensive care unit. So tertiary care, higher level of care, more complex. And you could kind of think of, you're moving from primary care, you're in an office, secondary care, you're in a community hospital, tertiary quaternary care, you're in a medical center, maybe a teaching hospital attached to a medical school where they're doing cutting edge research and changing the face of care. So it's kind of a progression of intensity. You should know the difference between primary and secondary, and then you should have a sense of kind of, I will lump together tertiary and quaternary as kind of one like super intense level. All right, so we talked a lot about this. Yeah, sorry. So secondary would be your smaller community hospitals. So like Cheshire Medical Center, it's a 150 bed facility, Exeter Hospital. Those are probably more your secondary facilities. You're not going to get a heart transplant at Exeter Hospital or Cheshire Medical Center. But you'll get your hernia repaired there, right? You'll have your baby there. But if your baby is delivered, 15 weeks early and can't breathe on his own or her own, that baby's gonna, I don't think Exeter has a NICU. So then you would go to the tertiary level where your baby would be evacuated down to Brigham or to MGH, and that's where you would get your baby would get that tertiary level of care. So secondary is a hospital, but it's think more like a community hospital, smaller hospital. Tertiary and quaternary care, think teaching hospital, where they're doing research and cutting edge care. Does that make sense? So we talked about primary care. You can get primary care from physicians or mid-levels. The function is there's a major function. I didn't really talk about this, about gatekeeping. Right. So that function of you go to see your primary care doctor and you're like, I've got knee pain. It's been going for 6 weeks. And the doc and your primary care doc says, all right, here's how we're going to try to treat this. You're going to ice it and you're going to take Motrin. And then if it's still bothering you in 3 weeks, come back and see me and we'll talk about what to do next. And then you come up and get back to next. And they say, all right, we've got a couple of options. We can send you to the orthopedic surgeon to get an evaluation, or we can send you to PT and you can try to do some exercise. Oh, let's try PT first because that's cheaper and I don't want to get cut on anyway. So then you go to PT. So then the doctor now makes what's called a referral to PT, right? So you show up at PT on your own, chances are your insurance company is not going to pay for it because you didn't get a referral. Now there are plans where you could do that, but most of us are on a plan where you have to have a referral to see a specialist. So you go to PT because your primary care doctor ordered it, the insurance company will pay for it, or pay for most of it. PT doesn't work. Now you go back to your doctor and say, I still got the pain. All right, now we're going to send you to see the orthopedic surgeon and get a judgment on that, right? So what's happening there is this what's called gatekeeping, right? So instead of, oh, my knee hurts, I'm just going to go on my own to see an orthopedic surgeon. Most insurance plans require you to go through your primary care provider to get a referral to a surgeon in your network. Primary care providers can be family medicine docs. They can be internal medicine docs, pediatricians. Remember, DO or MD really makes no difference these days. And then I call them mid-levels. Your book has another new name for it. Everybody gets offended if you're not appropriately treating them with the level of respect they believe that they deserve. So I call them mid-levels, but they keep coming up with different names for them. Family nurse practitioner, physician assistant, those are really common. Most of my early career in the military got my care from my PA, from a PA. Later on, sometimes got it from a physician, sometimes got it from a family nurse practitioner. Like I said, today I get it from a family nurse practitioner. She's good. She's good. Fine with it. We've talked about ambulatory surgery centers. So just kind of to highlight, outpatient surgery doesn't require an overnight stay. So that's the key. So before you go in to get the surgery, they're gonna have made a judgment. The thing we're gonna do today is not gonna require you to stay overnight. So therefore we can do it here, right? It's done outside the hospital structure, which lowers costs. Why does it lower costs? Because hospitals cost shift to lower cost things. They take their high cost things, they charge their high cost patients less, and they shift those costs down to the lower cost, the bread and butter patients, right? The ASC strips out of the hospital the bread and butter procedures, right? And the physician then does, the surgeon or whatever does them, surgeon, they're all ambulatory surgery center. They're all surgeons. So they're doing their surgery in their own space, right? But they're doing the less complicated things that don't require, the support of a hospital. They can be, and the key here is they can be owned by the physician who's actually providing the care. So now that motivates the physician to be like, yeah, why would I share this bill with the hospital when I can just build my own place, hire some HMP graduate to run it, and I'll just rake in the dough. So very common to see ophthalmology, orthopedics, ENT operating out of ASCs as an example. We haven't talked about hospice much, but so hospice is, so a lot of people think of hospice as a kind of treatment. It's really not. It's really a philosophy. It is an approach to care rather than a particular kind of treatment. So if you are diagnosed with a terminal illness, so hospital is for people who are dying. If you are diagnosed with a terminal illness and you are expected to have less than 6 months to live, you can qualify for hospice care under Medicare. But what happens is you have to, first of all, you have to agree to it. The physician can't just change you over to hospice care. The physician, you have to have a meeting with your physician, and you have to understand, okay, I understand that the end is nigh, and that I am going to shift from pursuing curative care to palliative care. So I'm going, with my physician, I've decided I've had enough. I'm not going to fight this anymore. I'm not going to imagine that you can cure my cancer. It's clear that it's progressed past a point where I could, where whatever you're going to do for me would actually eliminate the cancer. I just want to be comfortable. I want to be able to enjoy as much as possible, whatever time I have left. So you shift from curative, where you're trying to get rid of the cancer or whatever the illness is. It's not just cancer, but cancer is one of the more common ones. So you shift from getting curative care, where you're trying to cure the cancer, to palliative care. And palliative care just refers to controlling pain, right? Controlling pain, providing comfort. I told you about John the Bull Bonica, one of my distant relatives, right? He was one of the founders of the palliative care field, where he took his anesthesia knowledge, his ability to control pain, and looked at how to manage pain in people with serious illnesses and other areas of life as well. So palliative care focuses on quality of life. So there's a focus on pain management, of course, but then there's also a spiritual component. So not necessarily religious, but definitely religious if that's what works for you, right? So if you're a dedicated Catholic, right, there's going to be a priest involved, and so forth. You'll get religious support. If you're a Baptist, you'll get whatever you have a minister involved, whatever it is. So it's that, but it's not necessarily religious care. It can also just be kind of helping someone come to terms with the fact that they are approaching the end of their lives. And so, hospice nurses are really good with this. They help people kind of come to, arrive at some level of peace, right? That's the goal of hospice, is to have you comfortable, peaceful, and prepared to meet your end. So it can, and so because it's really a philosophy or an approach rather than a particular kind of treatment, it can really be delivered anywhere, right? And so there are home health agencies that are hospice agencies. So you're getting your hospice care in your own home, which to me would be the preferable way to go. And the home health agency sends hospice, trained personnel to your home to help you and your family members deliver that care, provide that care in your own home. It can be delivered in a nursing home. So you can be in a nursing home on hospice. So the nursing home is getting special payments to provide the hospice care in that setting. There are also hospice facilities. So I've got a short video with this week's extra reading about a place I think it's on the Cape, if I remember correctly, that is a hospice home. And so they try to provide a peaceful environment where, you can go, if you can't stay home for whatever reason, you can go there and receive care. And it's an institution, but it's like a really pretty place to be, right? Or you can get it in a hospital. You can be a hospice patient in a hospital setting. That's a little less rare. That's a little more rare because hospitals are really meant to provide the most intense level of care. But, if death is imminent, you could potentially, shift somebody to hospice care in a hospital. Home health. So I kind of mentioned this a minute ago. Home health is growing. It is exciting to see what's happening. So I subtitled this chapter There and Back Again. So, like I said, future is the past. Healthcare is moved from the home into institutions, and now it's coming full circle back to the home again. Why? Well, hospitals are really dangerous places to be. They're dangerous for a whole slew of reasons. One of which is the reason people go to hospitals is because they're really, really sick. Well, that means that they're bringing in all kinds of nasty bugs, right? And those nasty bugs kind of float around the hospital. And despite housekeeping doing its best job, some of these nasty bugs kind of get settled into the crooks and crannies of the hospital and kind of start to grow. And then you can pick up some really nasty bugs as a result, because these bugs have survived, bleach and other kinds of treatments to try to kill them. And, so hospitals can have that. Iatrogenic disease broadly includes those sorts of picking up bugs, but it also includes nurses making mistakes and delivering the wrong medication to you, mixing up the medication from the nurse's station to your bed. So they give you Mr. Jones's medication, and Mr. Jones gets yours medication, and Mr. Jones winds up having a heart attack. Why? Because he got not because there was anything wrong with him, but because he got the wrong meds. So it's a dangerous place to be for that reason. Human error is common. And then, so why else are we focusing on hospitals? Home health. Well, hospitals are wicked expensive. They're wicked expensive. They're literally the most expensive real estate to build, period, right? If you look at per square foot, how much it costs to build a house, like a normal residential house, an office, right? Where like any one of these, classroom, whatever, a medical office or a hospital. The hospital is by far the most expensive, and it's right up there with like nuclear power plants in terms of building costs. So it's super expensive, right? And what's really great is, again, technology, right? What's amazing about technology is technology is increasing what's possible. So things that we would have had to have you be in the hospital because it was too expensive to monitor you someplace else, right? Today, that monitoring equipment is cheap enough that we can, give the home health agency can buy it, have a technician come out, set you up, right? And then a doctor can be, or a nurse can be monitoring your vital signs back at the hospital, from a cubicle somewhere. And if something goes wrong, they can call you and say, "Hey, we see your blood pressure's going up. Everything okay?" "No, I'm just watching, Die Hard for the 14th time. I'm fine. I'm just excited," or whatever, right? Or, "Yeah, I'm feeling a little dizzy. I feel like I might fall down." "Okay, we'll be right there," right? So what was once not possible because of cost, the costs of monitors, right, have gone down. I mean, for those of you wearing an Apple Watch right now, there's more sophisticated technology in that Apple Watch in terms of, like, right now, Apple is keeping track of, your vitals in a way that hospitals couldn't have done 50 years ago, right? And you're just wearing it because it's cool. And it allows you to check your text messages without taking your phone out. But those capabilities are remarkable. And so what we can do now, chemotherapy in the home, right? Wouldn't you, if you've got to have some sort of awful procedure like that, wouldn't you rather have it at home than having to truck into a hospital, right, and deal in an impersonal environment? So these things are really remarkable. All right, so we'll stop there and we'll finish up these slides next time. And I'm going to review because I only have like 3 more slides. So we'll review the insurance assignment next time.